So I'm going to introduce Amy. So our guest speaker tonight is Amy Porter, and Amy is a wildlife conservation biologist with 25 years of experience working on scientific research, nature-based education, and community engagement projects in the US, Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. She grew up in Washington and has been a passionate naturalist in the area since she was young. Amy's worked extensively with primates, birds, otters, and now wolves. Currently, she's the director of conservation at Wolf Haven International, where she's involved with both wolf and prairie conservation, as well as a member of Washington's Wolf Advisory Group. So welcome, Amy. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this works. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Awesome. So I want to first say I'm really hoping this can be a pretty informal, fluid dialogue because I feel like so much about wolves, the really amazing stuff and the conversations come out more through dialogue than me just talking. But I will share a few things to get us started. And then please feel free to stop me at any point if there's questions or if you want me to expand on something. And I'm really terrible once I start talking, like navigating and monitoring who has questions. So maybe Marianne or Connie, I'll rely on you to just like, hey, Amy, pause a minute, and then we can go through there. So yeah, feel free to ask questions at any point along the way, or we can save it till the end, but whatever feels right to you. And then I'll just rely on you two to kind of help me monitor that. So I'm going to first start by just sharing a little bit about Wolf Haven and some of the programs that we're involved with. And so Wolf Haven is a sanctuary for captive born and displaced wolves and wolf dogs. And we're based in Tenino. We got started in 1982, and since then we have been a forever home for over 300 animals. And the animals under our care have come to us from many different paths. Some have been relinquished from private ownership. Some have come through various channels of pet trade. Others have come from roadside zoos, some accredited zoos. And while each animal has a unique story, they have all come to us through some type of captive environment. And Wolf Haven is the only wolf sanctuary in the world that is accredited by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. And this is really the gold standard of care for animals in captivity. And it's a testament to the quality of individualized care that our animal care team gives the animals every single day. And last year, we received their Outstanding Wildlife Sanctuary Award. And this is quite an honor because this was among over 200 sanctuaries worldwide. So to have that distinction is something we are all really, really proud of. And then Wolf Haven is also part of a federally managed endangered species program called SAFE, and this stands for Saving Animals from Extinction. And this is a captive breeding program, but with the intention of releasing some of those animals back into the wild. And so SAFE is really an umbrella program for a number of different endangered species. And we are part of two of those programs. One is for the American red wolves, which is the animal you see on the right side of the screen. And then the other is Mexican wolves, which is the one on top. And I just want to take a minute to share a really cool success story that Wolf Haven was involved with last year. And this is involving the American red wolf. So we had a male by the name of Finch who was born at Wolf Haven. He spent 7 years of his life at Wolf Haven. And earlier last year, he went out into the wild in North Carolina and he paired with a wild female and he helped produce a litter of 8 pups. And this is amazing for a number of reasons, but American red wolves are the most critically endangered canid in the world. So every animal that goes into the wild population is a huge success story. But you can also imagine an animal that's born and raised in captivity, how challenging it can be to not only get an animal like that to go out into the wild, but also to thrive in the wild and to be able to produce, to pair with a wild female and produce those pups. And so Wolf Haven is really recognized as a model facility for how to do that. So another thing that I'm really proud of for the organization. And then we have a number of education and outreach programs that are tailored for both youth as well as adults. And so you can come to Wolf Haven and you can learn all about wolf ecology and natural history and their conservation, all while seeing some of the wolves. And then we also bring those programs out into the community. And so tonight is kind of an example of that, is, coming out into the broader community and sharing some of the work, and also just some of the challenges and the rewards of sharing a landscape with wolves. And then in addition to the work that we do at the sanctuary, we are also involved with wild wolf conservation. And this is really my role within the organization. And so since 2013, we have served on the state's wolf advisory group. And this group is often referred to as the WAG. And this is a group of stakeholders that represent livestock producers and hunters and wolf advocates that are working in partnership with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to help guide wolf recovery and management in the state. And what I really love about this group is it takes a pretty unique approach to wolf conservation and management, and that it's really focused on building strong relationships across stakeholder groups, and then putting in place processes that really are designed to develop and enhance the well-being of all stakeholders. And so it's not just favoring wolf advocates or hunters or livestock producers, but we're trying to find ways that complement and satisfy all these different perspectives and visions and ideas for how wolves should be conserved and managed in the state. And you can imagine that's not a very easy thing to do. And so now I just want to take a minute to get us all grounded in where and how wolves are currently distributed throughout Washington state. So I'm going to draw your attention to this map on the left, and this is a map from the most recent population count in Washington. These annual population counts happen every year on January 1st, and then the report comes out usually the beginning of April, mid-April. And these are done by wolf biologists from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And what you're looking at on this map, all these green polygons in here, these are the known wolf pack territories. And what you'll notice in this map is that most of the wolves and the wolf packs in Washington are really concentrated up in the northeast part of the state. So these are animals that have come into Washington naturally. There's never been a reintroduction of wolves in Washington. All of the wolves that we currently have in Washington have come in on their own from places like Idaho and moving west, or they've come down south from places like Canada. And what you'll notice is that they really filled in this area up in the northeast corner. And wolves are incredibly territorial. And so as this area of the state really filled in with wolf packs, then animals, individuals started moving out and moving westward and starting to fill in the North Cascades. And then we have some packs down here in the southeastern part of Washington. But what you'll also notice from this map is that we currently don't have any known wolves in our region in the South Cascades and Northwest Coast. Now, as of the end of 2022, we know, oops, that's going too fast. We know that at least 4 animals have successfully made it south down across I-90, which creates a big barrier for wolf movement, but not only for wolves, for a number of critters. And they've all shown up kind of down in this region around Klickitat County. And of those 4 wolves that have shown up, that we know that have shown up in here because they've had radio collars on, 3 of those animals have been killed illegally. And then the 4th one was a female that actually paired with a male down in this region, and they formed the big muddy pack in 2022, but that female ended up disappearing and she hasn't been seen in over a year. So this is concerning for us because while wolves are just starting to show up on the landscape down in this region, 3 of them have already been poached and 1 disappeared. And this is in an area where there hasn't been any known conflict with livestock. And so what I'm going to pull us over now to is this map on the right. And this, so in my screen, I have like all of our faces here. Can you see that full map, or are you seeing, is it cut off somewhat from all of us, like our screens?
We can see it.
Okay.
It's not huge, but we can see it.
Okay, I think it looks different on your end than mine. Okay, so this map on the right, what this is a habitat suitability map for wolves. And this was put together by researchers at UW. And by habitat suitability, what we're talking about is where are there healthy ungulate populations? So where are there healthy where's their healthy prey base for wolves? And these bright yellow and flaming red, orange areas, that's prime wolf habitat. That's where there's really healthy populations of either elk or deer or some type of ungulate. And what you'll notice is that while we aren't situated perfectly in any of these hot spots, we are in an important connector. So remember down in here, this is Klickitat County area. This polygon is that big muddy pack that had formed in 2022. But all of the wolves that have made it down in this region have shown up down precisely where you'd expect, where there's good habitat. But also up here in the Olympics, there's still really good habitat for wolves. And where we are down in here, you know, in Thurston County, we may be situated precisely in an area where wolves in Klickitat or down in the South Cascades are going to be moving up into the Olympics eventually. And so if we think about some of the habitat connectivity work that's happening right now and assessments along I-5, one of the areas that they've scoped out for a wildlife crossing, the northern linkage, would run from exit, I think it's 99 to 88, and that's precisely around Wolf Haven area. So we, again, may be in a really important area as wolves are moving out and kind of across the state. And then with this map, I just thought it was interesting because I know you are all interested in thinking about animal movements. This is also from the recent population count, and it's looking at known wolf dispersal. So when individuals leave their pack to find a new mate and set up their own territory, where do they go and how are they moving? And so each of these different colored lines represents an individual that had a radio collar on, so they were tracking its movement. And we can see that some animals in eastern Washington were moving up and out of Washington state and up into Canada. Some animals have moved over, you know, and gone up into Canada and then came back down into the North Cascades. And then this was that animal that's made it down into the South Cascades. So I thought you guys might be interested in just seeing kind of how wolves move. And wolves can move an incredible distance. And again, thinking about wolves being very territorial, you know, in that northeastern area where in here, you know, all these packs are really concentrated in. If you're an individual that's leaving your pack and dispersing and you're hitting another pack, you're going to get chased out by those pack members. So you're going to keep getting pushed and pushed and pushed until you find a vacant area that's not occupied by wolves. But the other challenging thing for wolves is not only do they have to find an area that's not already inhabited by wolves that has a good prey base, but they also have to find mates too. So it's challenging to be a wolf, and that's also what can push them to move really far. And one wolf, a pretty well-known history, his name was OR7, which means he was an Oregon wolf, but he was originally started in Northeast Oregon and traveled over 1,000 miles down into California. So they can have exceptionally long travel distances. And so now I'm going to pull us into a little bit of a conversation around a program that I'm developing that I'm really excited about. And in thinking about the potential for wolves to show up in our area, and probably much sooner than what's on most people's radar, we're creating and we're trying to design a program called Wolfwise Communities. And I'm also emphasizing on a landscape of hope. And what this program is really about is trying to proactively engage community members about talking about the potential for wolves to return, what that can look like in our local landscape, what some of those challenges might be, because they're going to be probably quite different when wolves show up in our area relative to challenges that we're seeing in Eastern Washington, just because the landscape is different. We don't have tons of big livestock operations. We do have some, but we have a lot more hobby farms, which means that potentially a lot more people are going to be affected by the arrival of wolves. And so thinking about some of these novel challenges that we might face, but also really proactively trying to have conversations so that we can start shifting the narrative from wolves versus livestock, which is really the emphasis of what fuels so much conflict right now, towards something that feels more collaborative and holistic and oriented around problem solving rather than just division. And it's really about trying to figure out ways and emphasize ways that humans can really thrive on landscape with wolves if it's done well, if those proactive efforts are done early and well. And it's really about balancing wildlife conservation, human well-being, and economic stability, and thinking through that and what that can look like and how that can happen. And so what the Wolfwise program is really designed to do, or what we're hoping it's designed to do, is understand first the ways that people perceive and define wolf issues, because wolf issues are incredibly complex and they can very quickly be really divisive and can really fracture communities. And so the first step is to just understand, and part of why I'm excited about being here tonight is just trying to get a better understanding of the various ways that people think about and perceive wolf issues. And then the big one is also to exchange reliable information. And this is really an effort to break down our quick ways of making assumptions about things, because so much of what I see happening in the world of wolves is we very easily and sometimes even unconsciously get stuck in our silos, and we're not having enough conversations with people who hold different or sometimes very opposing perspectives. And so when we do that, or when we don't do that, then we very quickly start making assumptions about how a livestock producer feels about wolves, or how hunters feel about wolves, or how wolf advocates feel about working landscapes. And assumptions, to me, are so incredibly dangerous because they very quickly lead us down a path of feeling like, well, gosh, this person doesn't care at all about wolves, or this person doesn't care at all about my livelihood and my ability to protect and serve my family. And when we come from a head and heart space where we feel like, gosh, I care about this thing so deeply, and that person doesn't care at all about it, that's where we start moving into that space of dehumanizing people. And then when we're in that space, how are we ever going to get to genuine coexistence with wolves when we feel like the people who are sharing a landscape with them or working around them are hating them? And so when we can start having those conversations more readily with folks, again, who have different and opposing perspectives maybe than we do, that's when we can start identifying shared values and goals. And through that, I mean, that's where the magic happens, because once we can identify shared values and shared goals that we can work together towards, that's where we can start really getting creative and innovative and really brainstorming practical solutions that benefit all the stakeholder groups. And I feel like that is really, the one thing about wolves, like wolf conflict is dynamic. It is always changing. It is always, something is always different. The players are always different. But the one constant about wolves is they demand you to think out of the box, and especially in navigating conflict with wolves. And so if we can get to a space where we're cultivating a safe space where people can come together, share their perspectives, share their realities, and get it wrong, but be in a safe space where it's okay to get it wrong. And you will be surrounded by people that'll be like, well, let me tell you a little bit more about what I'm experiencing and how this is affecting my life and how maybe you're missing a piece, but in a safe space. And gosh, we're really not seeing that broadly in the world of wolves and in the world in general right now. And so all of this is really designed then to cultivate a shared sense of ownership of both process and outcomes, because we all know, whether we're talking about wolves or any conservation challenge or anything, I think, in life, when we don't feel genuinely part of a process that is inclusive and respectful and all of that, then we're not going to be committed to making anything, to really creating enduring change and arriving at enduring change. So the Wolfwise program has a lot of lofty goals, but I believe it's possible, and I see this work happening through my work on the Wolf Advisory Group. And so what I really want to see is this happening more broadly and more collectively across our local community here in Thurston County. And so that all sounds great, right? But then how do you do it? And so the vision that we had when we first started developing this program was to connect with our local partners and colleagues and community members and start thinking about ways that maybe we could create community forums and have a centralized place where folks can regularly come and start engaging in these really hard and uncomfortable conversations about, and it doesn't even have to be about wolves. It could be about anything that's related to natural resource conservation and challenges that people face in that realm. And I think that is these community forums are a really great way, again, to do that reliable information exchange and to starting to get to know our community members better and having those systems set up to regularly interact. But what I'm really excited about now, and something that I would love all of your feedback on, is developing opportunities for what I'm calling experiential exchanges. And what I mean by that is designing a program where, let's say, a really strong wolf advocate that doesn't think cows belong on the landscape could come out and visit with a livestock producer and see their operation for a day and actually take part in the daily activities that they are doing. And then I think in that way, we can start really building trust and building empathy and building agency and building belonging through that experiential exchange. And we start developing not only a greater sense of empathy, but a greater sense of understanding and appreciation for different lifestyles and different cultures. And similarly, what if we could have livestock producer who doesn't particularly love wolves come out to Wolfhaven for a day and see some of the programs that we're involved with, and not just with wolves, but also we're landowners. We have 36 acres of Mima Mound Prairie on our property that we manage. And maybe they could get involved in creating enrichment food for the wolves that we have at our place, or helping us rebuild an enclosure or a fence or something that they're very skilled in, but seeing how it's done at Wolfhaven. And I think those exchanges are really powerful in doing all those things and building that trust and empathy and agency. And there's actually even some cool research that has come out through civic health and civic trust building and civic engagement that shows that community forums, just dialogue alone, can be good, but it's not the piece that actually builds trust and belonging. It was those experiential exchange, people coming together across divides and actively working together towards a shared goal. And that was the piece that really built all these things. And so I think these two in harmony, these community forums and experiential exchanges, are going to be a really powerful mover in proactively building Wolfwise communities. And it's something that surprisingly isn't being done by any other group in this region or even across Washington right now. So I think we're onto something. And through the more that I talk with people about it, people are like, gosh, that sounds really exciting. But now we're kind of in a stage of like, okay, well, what could some of these experiential exchanges look like? So these are things that we're working on and thinking about. And so now, wolves and wolf conflict, particularly around livestock, is one element, one dimension of the human dimensions of wolf conservation and management. But we know that humans affect and influence wolves in other ways. And a lot of that can be through our influence on climate change. And this is, I know, another area that you are all really interested in. So I want to talk a little bit about how wolves are affected by climate change. And wolves, when we think about that, the first thing we want to think about is, what are wolves' prey base? Like, what are they typically eating? And wolves primarily, their primary prey are ungulates. So things like moose and deer and elk. And wolves are really adaptive though. So that's their primary prey, but they can also subsist pretty heavily on animals like beaver and otters, like along the Northwest coast and up in Canada. There's areas where wolves are subsisting heavily on beavers and salmon. And then even in places like Minnesota, during certain times of the year, they can subsist, not entirely, but pretty heavily on berries, blueberries. So they have this incredible adaptability in what they're eating. And then I also mentioned, you know, they can travel really far and they can inhabit a number of different landscapes. And so all of that flexibility in their natural history means in some ways that they aren't as directly affected by climate change as some other critters are, but their prey base is very affected by climate change. And so now I just want to share a little bit about some of those indirect effects climate change can have on wolves. So when we think about the climate warming and snow melt, that can be a really big challenge for wolves because wolves have an incredible hunting advantage when they're in snow because they can move very easily over snowy landscapes, but their prey, when we think about those ungulates like moose and deer and elk, they don't move so easily through snow. It slows them down, they get stuck, and so that makes it a bit easier for wolves to really subsist on them. And so as that shift starts happening, maybe we're going to start seeing things like where wolves are not able to take down some of this prey as easily as they could. And at certain times of the year during winter, when other things might not be available or as readily available to them, are going to have a hard time in finding food. And that in some ways we could think could push them, depending on where they are on the landscape, into focusing more on things like livestock because they're not able to get their wild ungulate prey as easily. We know that heat stress and poor nutrition can also make ungulates really susceptible to disease, and chronic wasting disease is a big problem within ungulates. And we know that we've just started to have some of the first cases of chronic wasting disease show up in Washington. And so this is a big one. And then wildfire-driven habitat changes can push predators and prey, but especially predators, closer to humans. And we know that that can be problematic, especially for wolves. And wolves are very shy of humans. They really try to avoid humans. They're very different from coyotes in that way. But if we start getting into a system where wildfire is really limiting habitat, we may start pushing wolves closer and closer where they may not have as many areas to go, or they may not be able to live in their preferred habitat. And as they get closer to humans, then we may see more direct conflict with wolves. And then post-fire can initially favor some species like deer, but it can be really harsh on moose. And so moose tend to be really challenged with heat stress, but then they also can get overridden with parasites like ticks. And so all these things, again, while climate change might not have a direct effect on wolves themselves, again, it can have a really strong effect on their prey. And so for me, I guess my big concern with that always comes is like, gosh, if anything happens and we push wolves to wanting to focus or needing to focus more on other animals that are around, like livestock, then we're really going to start having problems. And then on top of all that, and in addition to all the work that we do with wolves and at the sanctuary and wolf conservation through wild wolves, we also, as I mentioned earlier, we have 36 acres of Mima Mound Prairie at Wolf Haven. So we're involved with a lot of different conservation efforts within the prairie, but this is really an interesting facet of Wolf Haven because when we first acquired that property in 1982, all of the 36 acres of prairie around it were completely buried under Scotch broom. And so by the early 90s or so, one of the ways that people were starting to handle the Scotch broom is they were just mowing it. But we know that mowing is just going to bring it back, every year. And then it wasn't really until early 2000 that we started doing intense restoration efforts. So we partnered with folks like Center for Natural Lands Management and some others to really start restoring the prairie. And by really intensive restoration efforts, one of the big things we started doing was prescribed burns. So since 2007, we've had an annual burn on the property every year. We've now gone through 2 full iterations of burns. All the Scotch broom is under control. And so we now can just manage all the Scotch broom entirely by just hand pulling. And we have been a reintroduction site for Mazama pocket gophers. We have bluebirds on the property. We're being considered potentially as a candidate site for Taylor's checker spot butterfly release. But all of these efforts have now shaped our small but mighty prairie into what's recognized as one of the best examples of restored prairie habitat in the whole South Sound region. So it's another element that we're really excited about. So I moved through that a little quickly, but I wanted to make sure that we had time to like really get into discussion. And so I'm going to leave it at there for the presentation part, but really open it up for you all to ask any questions or to start engaging in dialogue.
So Amy, I want to, so I don't know if you don't need to share your screen if you want to
Okay.
stop, you can.
Yeah.
I want to ask a couple of questions. I want to start out with, so the Mima Mounds, isn't that where there's a shooting range out there? Do the guns bother the animals?
So Mima Mounds Preserve is a different place,
Okay.
and the shooting range is there. So we don't actually ever hear that. I went out to Mima Mounds just a couple weeks ago, and I was totally blown away by how much shooting you could hear there. And I don't remember that when I was growing up, like back when I was a student at Evergreen, going out there. I used to go out there all the time to see short-eared owls, and I don't remember the shooting
It's
that. Yeah,
bad.
but fortunately, on our site, on our property, we don't hear that.
So my other question, and then I'll turn it over to everybody else, is when I was at a Washington State conservation conference. Anyway, the people that are in, I want to say southwestern Washington, they have a problem with the wolves. But when they were talking about it, I asked somebody who was saying, "Yeah, they're just, they're awful. They're killing our livestock." I said, "So have you had that happen?" No. But it's the narrative that's out there. And so it's just kind of swept that area, and they're all kind of scared, even though they haven't had that problem. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And, so in the annual wolf report that comes out every year by Department of Fish and Wildlife, it's a pretty hefty report. It can be like 80 pages long. And it also tells not only like where the wolves, but which wolf packs have been implicated in livestock depredations, how many times. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife also puts out a monthly report, and it updates how, if any packs have been involved. 80% of packs in Washington have never been involved in livestock depredations. And that is not because they don't cross areas where there are livestock. They are overlapping areas where there's livestock. It's just not every wolf is prone to attacking livestock. The challenge is that once wolves start doing it, once a pack starts doing it, it can escalate very quickly. And for certain producers, it can be a very big problem. And so that's what we start calling chronic conflict. And so for some producers, it can be a big thing. And so what I feel challenged by is a lot of times you'll hear wolf advocates say things like, wolves don't really kill that many livestock. It's like 0.001%. And so it's really nothing. Now, if you're a producer that's experiencing livestock loss and you're hearing, oh, it's nothing, that's really offensive. And so I hate it when people say that, but I understand what they're trying to get at. It's like most wolf packs are not involved in depredations, but the ones that are, the thing is that depredations, once they start, they can escalate very quickly. And once, wolves are incredibly social. They teach their pack members certain behaviors. And so once that behavior spreads, or once one wolf does it, teaches it to a buddy, and then they teach it to a buddy, and it can become a problem quite quickly. And so in Washington State, now our state's complicated because our state is split. And so wolves in Eastern Washington they have lost federal protections. They are considered part of the Northern Rocky Mountain population. And so they are not protected federally. They're managed by the state. And so wolves in Western Washington, so the North Cascades, South Cascades region, they maintain federal protections. So that means they're managed by US Fish and Wildlife. So what that means in practice is that if you're managed by US Fish and Wildlife, management strategies are much more stringent. So things like lethal removal of wolves are not possible if they have federal protections. But in Eastern Washington, where they're managed by the state, those animals that are involved in chronic conflict, there's more flexibility on how you can respond, on how the department can respond to that. And so our state's a little challenging that way. But, lethal removal of wolves where they've lost federal protection, that's a tool in the toolbox that our state uses. We don't use it very often, but sometimes when you have a situation where there's chronic conflict and livestock, there's a whole list of criteria that have to be in place before the state even considers it. But if you're a livestock producer and you're throwing every non-lethal deterrent at the situation that you have access to and that is appropriate for that operation, and you're still experiencing conflict, then the state determines whether or not lethal removal of the problematic wolf should happen. And in order for that to even be considered, so there's a whole slew of things, and we can talk about that. But the main thing is that it's not just a cow's killed and it automatically triggers lethal removal. There have to be 3 confirmed wolf depredations, so confirmed by a state conflict specialist within 30 days or 4 within 10 months. And those all have to be confirmed, and the producer has to have used at least 2 non-lethal deterrents that were, agreed upon by the state conflict specialist and the producer, and a whole list of things. And even if those criteria are met, the director of Fish and Wildlife still has the ultimate authority in making that decision. And he can still say, I don't think enough was done. And so I think I think other things could be done that could potentially stop the behavior. Let's try those first. And then lethal removal, if it is granted, it's like the last resort. Now, there are people, this is a big source of tension in Washington, because there are some folks, a lot of wolf advocates, that feel like lethal removal should never happen under any circumstances. There are a lot of producers who feel like once those criteria are met that are established, once those things that are written in a protocol are met, this department needs to move more quickly and efficiently to take out that wolf. So it's a messy issue.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest one. It is the biggest issue that creates tension around wolves and different stakeholder groups in Washington right now.
Yeah, I won't go into it, but it was not pretty.
Well, and that's, with the Wolfwise vision, and what I was saying is, it is so easy for folks to make assumptions about things and to have false narratives and to spread false narratives because they're not accessing reliable information. They're hearing it from their friend who heard it from their friend.
Right.
That stuff spreads quickly. And if we're not making really serious, concentrated efforts to talk with folks, outside of our silos and really get reliable information, man, fear and misinformation can spread like wildfire.
And they weren't kind to the Fish and Wildlife guy. But anyway, I'm going to see if anybody else has any questions. And maybe somebody has a question who, you don't care for wolves or you have more concerns about it. And I bet Amy would love to hear from you if you're on. Am I the only one?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, Grace,
Go ahead,
and then
Grace,
Pete.
go first.
Oh,
Okay. So Amy, it occurred to me, if you're at a point where they are possibly going to have to kill a wolf because there's no other option to prevent this pack of wolves from killing a bunch of beef, is it ever chosen to take them down with God, I'm having a hard time with words, shooting them with something that puts them out and then they get moved to somewhere else? Or is that real expensive?
It's expensive, and it's not only that it's expensive. So the challenge with that is wolves are incredibly territorial. And you don't want to take a wolf that's been implicated in depredations and then move it to somewhere else, because somebody's going to be like, you just put this problem here. So that creates more social tension. But so that's probably the main reason it would never happen. But also wolves are incredibly territorial. And wolves are pack members. So if you took out one individual and put it by itself, you're essentially, I won't say you're killing that wolf, but you're not setting that wolf up for success if you take it out of its pack and then just release it on its own somewhere.
Understood.
So there's a lot of challenges with that.
I thought that's what you'd say. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Amy, first of all, I apologize for joining late. So
Oh, no problem.
Might have missed
For
some things.
coming.
But I live in Corvallis, Oregon, and we have very progressive groups around land preservation, and we are very fortunate to have this beautiful green necklace around our community, all around the foothills. And we don't have any issues with wolves, but we've had quite a few issues with cougar. And I wonder, what are the similarities? What are the differences? And maybe you can answer that.
Yep. So wolves and cougars they hunt in very different ways. Cougars are if you're going to run into wildlife issues with a carnivore, and have problems, it's more likely to be with a cougar than it is with a wolf. They're much more aggressive around people, whereas wolves, if they see people, they are really going to run away typically. I mean, unless you're standing on a den or you're really threatening pups, wolves are going to shy away, whereas cougars can be more assertive. And then their hunting strategies in ungulates are very different because cougars are not pack animals. They're mostly hunting solitarily, and they're also ambush predators, whereas wolves, they're what we call cursorial. They chase their prey. So part of what wolves do is they like to get their prey running, because that allows them to assess where's one that is going to be a little bit easier, where's one that might be sick or injured or not moving as fast or not moving as well, and they're going to target those animals, because ungulates are not easy for wolves to take down. It really requires that pack effort, but there's a lot of missed opportunities. And so not every time a wolf goes after a moose or an elk or a deer, they get it. In fact, there's a lot more failures than actual success. So cougars, though, they're not chasing their prey like wolves. They're just sitting and waiting, and they're ambushing their prey. And there's some really cool studies that have come out recently from University of Washington. There's a whole program called the Predator Prey Project. And it's looking at not only how wolves interact on the landscape or how wolves behave on the landscape, but how does that shift and change when they're on a landscape with cougars and with coyotes and bears and all the whole other suite of carnivores that we have. And how does it change wolf behavior? How does it change other predator behavior? And wolves can kind of affect where cougars go. It may push cougars up higher in elevation. It may push them closer to human habitation. But it could also change the time of day that they're acting, because cougars will avoid where wolves are hanging out. But yeah, look into the work from the Predator Prey Program, because it looks at a lot of stuff about how these top predators are interacting and influencing each other on the landscape.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered about other states, and particularly the states that are around Washington, if the issues are similar, different, and a little bit about wolves in the United States, if whatever you know about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so wolves, in places like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, that whole sector, and then also Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon, that's considered the Northern Rocky Mountains. And they were federally delisted back in 2011. So once wolves and any critter loses federal protections, once they're no longer on the endangered species list, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, then management falls on the state. And each state has a different management plan. So how Wyoming and Montana and Idaho manage their wolves, it's pretty similar, but it's very different, from places like Washington. So in places like Idaho and Wyoming and Montana, they have a wolf hunting season. And some things are pretty darn atrocious to me, because the hunting season, it can be open year round. Some have no bag limits. Some have, you can use night vision, you can set out traps and snares. And some of these places you have limitations on snares is only I was just reading today, is only 1,000 meters from campgrounds. I mean, imagine being at a campground and you have a dog maybe that's off leash and wanders off and they get caught in those. I mean, 1,000 meters isn't that far. And so, that's a big difference, is that these states have hunting. A lot of folks in those states don't particularly love wolves, but the challenge is, the wolf livestock conflict is really the epicenter of a lot of the conflict around wolves. There's also, you know, a lot of hunters believe that wolves really affect hunting opportunities because they kill all the ungulates. And part of what the predator prey study showed is that at least in Washington state, that's actually not true. Like wolves can have an effect on ungulates, but a lot of other things like, and mostly severe winters, cougar predation, and car collisions are a big mortality factor for ungulates, much more so than wolves. Now that could be different in other states, and I don't know how it looks in other states, but I think a lot of the assumptions that hunters have that wolves are just decimating ungulate populations just doesn't hold up when you look at the science behind it. But yeah, when management falls under the state, it can look very different. So when we start getting into conversations like, you know, with the current administration, wolves are probably going to lose federal protections again. This is, you know, protections for wolves kind of fall on this pendulum. It goes back and forth, and that can be really dangerous for wolves because that swinging back and forth just creates a lot of confusion. And it tends to be the times when we start to see things like increased rates of poaching. But, you know, Washington state, I think if wolves were completely managed by the state, I think Washington is doing an exceptional job in how we manage wolves. I mean, compared to all other states, including Oregon, and California still doesn't have as many wolves, but the number of times that lethal removal is actually triggered and then followed through is very minimal, despite an increasing wolf population every year, except this last year. And so I think if wolves lose their federal protections, in Washington state, it's probably not going to be a big deal. But in places like Wisconsin, as soon as wolves in Wisconsin lose federal protections, it automatically opens a hunting season. So that is concerning. If wolves in Washington lose federal protections, they are still listed currently as a state endangered animal. So hunting wouldn't be an option. And if wolves ever did lose state protections, it would have to go through the commission in order to think about would a hunting season ever be possible in Washington? I don't think that our state would ever allow that. We could, but we're nowhere near that right now. But other states are.
So I also wanted to hear, was it Debbie that said that you've heard the other side? Was that you, Debbie?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm interested to hear from you. So tell me about, because you
Well,
have hunters or?
Yes, I have a family of hunters, but I have not firsthand heard this. I mean, from the source, I've just heard about we have a lot of cattle people here, and they have cattle in open range areas where there's no fences, to where you tend to have the habitat for the wolf.
Yeah.
And
Gotcha.
yeah. And so, which probably is confusing for the wolf because it's in his habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So I have heard about a lot of cattle losses there. I've also heard from some family members who live up by the North Cascades Highway that they have had people tell them that the wolves have really been a problem with their cattle. But again, I've heard from herd. It's not.
Yes, I hear you. Okay,
So,
I was just curious.
You know, one of the things with wolves too is that even if they're not killing your cattle, wolves can have an indirect effect on your livestock just by their presence. Their presence alone can be stressful to wolves, and that can affect things like pregnancy rates or weight gain, and you know, ultimately things that affect your bottom line. And so one of the things that we talk about in Washington, especially regarding, you know, compensation programs, so like if you lose a cow to a wolf, you know, you'll hear wolf advocates say, well, they're compensated for it. Well, that's a whole nother beast of a topic that we will have to do a whole nother presentation on. But what a lot of compensation programs don't tackle are those indirect effects. What are the true costs of having wolves on the landscape? Because it's more than just you losing a cattle. It's also the things, again, like lost pregnancy. But what about all the time, extra time and resources that you have to now do to put in place non-lethal deterrents like fencing or having a range rider go out? And so again, that costs money, that costs time. we don't know enough about, I mean, non-lethal tools, we of course advocate for them and they can be very effective, but they're very context specific. So what works well on one livestock operation might not work at all on a neighboring operation. And so a lot of producers feel like, hey, you're asking me to put all this extra time and resources into a technique. We're not even sure if it's going to work. And then with things like flattery, which is, fencing with, flags that for a while can be scary for wolves because wolves don't like new things. It has a short lifespan. Like it can be very effective for maybe a month, and then wolves learn very quickly, oh, that's not that scary. I can just go right under it, And so then you're a producer that's investing all this time to put up flattery, which is also expensive, and then you have to take it down in a month, and then you have to move it. And who pays for all that? Like there's a lot of NGOs and government pays for a lot of it, but a lot of that cost, especially with range riders, people who are on horseback or ATVs, going around the herd and monitoring the herd, they're very expensive. The job is seasonal, and so not many people, necessarily want to do it, but it's also an incredible skill set that not many people have. And so what do you do if the state is telling you, hey, if you want to prevent conflict with wolves, you need to have a range rider out there daily or near daily, but we don't have anybody, so you got to find someone. And that's really making a lot of producers angry because they feel like range riding and these tools, that's a wolf management tool, not a livestock tool. So why are they now being asked to absorb all these costs when they don't want wolves here anyway? And that's not saying that they hate wolves and that they want all wolves eradicated. What they're saying is, I don't really want wolves on my property. And if there's problems, I shouldn't have to be the one that absorbs all the costs because I don't really want them here anyway. So
Right. Amy, there's a comment from Leslie. She wanted to say that the Scotch broom mitigation and native flora reintroduction, she loved it. Great job.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we usually end about now. What I wanted to say is I love the fact that you have balanced this, that you're not just all about wolf protection, but you understand the other side of the story. So you should run for president. No, yeah, all of us are like, yeah, okay, please do. But anyway, yeah, please. So anyway, but thank you. I think what you're doing is amazing, and I love the fact that you have this balance, this scales of balance in what you're doing.
Yeah,
So
I'm really lucky. I mean, that's part of the biggest benefits I've had from serving on the Wolf Advisory Group. It has given me the opportunity, it has given me the pathways and made those connections for me so that I can talk to producers. And I think that this is so much of what I see the Wolfwise vision trying to emulate is because we're all busy, right? Like wolves are just one element in the conservation world among 80 million different things, and who has time to tackle everything? And so, trying to think like, well, how are people going to make the time and the effort to go out of their way to find these opportunities and make those contacts? But dang, what if we could create them for people? What if we could work collectively to create experiential exchange and offer them to people? And whether they have time or feel like it's worth it or not, I'm sure some people would, but let's cultivate that opportunity for people and let's start creating ways that we can bridge divides. And I think that, in all my work, I've worked again, through Latin America, Africa, all over the world. And I think the best thing we can do for wolves, even if you're the most staunch wolf advocate and you think wolves are the most amazing critter on the planet, the best thing we can do is talk with one another, be curious, ask good questions, and really try to understand. And that doesn't mean that we have to agree with things. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with what a livestock producer wants or what a hunter wants. But I think it is our responsibility to understand it and to be a little bit more empathetic and more curious about it. And to me,
Yeah.
that's what the Wolfwise vision is all about. And that's not just
So-
for wolves. Like, what if the world did that?
Oh,
Well, yeah,
exactly.
exactly. So we'll all need to visit Wolf Haven,
Yes.
and yeah, and
Do
so
do you still have the Howlands?
We do not do that. And one of the big reasons we don't do it is it's actually quite stressful for wolves. So
Oh.
those were our early days, and I know they were fun, but it actually can be quite stressful for wolves. So in really
Oh,
like the true nature of a sanctuary, we stopped doing that. But
well,
most of the
that's
time
good.
when you come out to Wolf Haven, you'll get a little howl, you'll hear a little bit. But
Yeah.
you know, if this collective group would ever be interested in organizing like a visit to Wolf Haven, I can certainly help facilitate that, and I can make that happen. We would just need to coordinate, like, when is a good time for you? We're not open every day of the week, and we're very, you know, we have a limited number of people that can go in at one time just for the health and the well-being of the wolves. But this is a small enough group that we could totally accommodate that. Or we could do multiple visits. But if that's something you're interested in, we can certainly talk and coordinate that.
Thank you, Amy. Well, I think that we're probably going to wrap it up. Thank you again, and
My
Leslie,
pleasure.
thank you too. We'll stay in touch and follow you on social media.